Now, just on the trees too, the number of trees in between B and C, what about the types of trees? So particularly down Stapleton's Road, because you call them trees and shrubs.
Yes.
Are they older? I know there's an Aboriginal report in here, but it was quite difficult to wade through and identify the geographical location of the trees they're talking about. Can you tell me about Stapleton's Road?
Well, I can summarise again. We made a great effort, the team made a great effort to include as much information as possible on tree impact and mitigation within the consultation document. And tree loss and the forms of the trees were summarised. So for option C, for instance, 112... sorry.
No.
No.
70.
trees, sorry, I'm looking down the wrong column.
Yep.
They were able to split those between native and exotic, so 28 native trees, 42 exotic. And then they looked at the life remaining of those trees. So if we don't do anything, how long might they live? So it's a measure of the quality. So 28 of those trees really have a short life left, so less than 10 years. 20 between 10 and 20, and then further 22 greater than 20 years. And one of the considerations that the team have given has been to target the improvements, the widening or the tree loss, largely to areas where there's fewer trees affected, and also where there's older or lower quality trees impacted. So whilst we wouldn't be widening impacting on the trees along the entire length, the sections we wouldn't be touching are largely because they have good quality, high number of trees.
Right, and I didn't see anything in the consultation feedback from Stapleton's Road about the trees particularly. There wasn't a huge uproar as there was in option A.
No, and we picked up a reasonable amount of support where residents on Stapleton's Road felt that they would like to see a tidy up of that section, which we can provide. I
would concur with that. And just from the deputation this morning, it was Clary Pearce, he was concerned, he gave us the impression that there was very little enhancement going to be planned for the stream in that area, and it would just be pockets. Can you tell us how much enhancement you envisage and where it might be?
Yes, so the affected section is something around about 400 metres long, of which about 250 metres, so just a little over half of that, would actually be directly affected with works and enhancement. And as I was saying, the 150 metres that we wouldn't be touching is largely being left untouched because it has mature, high-quality tree stock, and we've been trying to work around them. So, if you've got a good quality area, you don't need to enhance that further, and so we've tried to design around them.
And he was also, from the consultations, people were concerned about the Avon River being able to cope with the extra water going into it. Do you have a response to that?
So we have done some more detailed modelling around the Avon River and the impacts of the scheme, and it's felt that those impacts are very small, very modest. We've considered a very, what's called a 2% probability event in both the Avon River and in Dudley Creek, in conjunction with a 20% tide. That in fact is higher sort of level of service than you'd normally design for, and the impacts were minor downstream and about the outlet of the bypass, mostly due to the different responses in the catchment. So the Avon's a very large catchment, the Dudley's just a small component of it. So they respond in different ways to different rainfall events. And also the Avon flood levels are impacted by the tide, so not affecting the tide with their proposal. So the works from our analysis to date don't have a significant impact downstream.
And so when you've got, let's say option C was supported today, the Dudley will still continue around on its normal route as well.
Correct.
And does option C just kick in an event by a flat?
Correct.
Or?
Correct. Yeah, that would be the idea, because you'd maintain environmental flows in the Dudley, so that you weren't compromising the
right. And there was just one other one, if I may, is that there was concerns about moving the flooding. Is that valid?
No, it's not valid. And of course, we also heard this morning the modelling being referred to as a dark art. Now, I'd like to sort of clarify that modelling is quite mature. In fact, I would say it's quite a mature science. And in fact, hydraulic modelling today has particularly in this situation where we have the ability not only to drive computer models to simulate rain events, but we also use real-world data. So we get out there and actually monitor and then compare the real-world results with what the model produced. When we see good correlation, we can then start to rely on that science. So, you know, it's far from being a dark art.
Thank you.
Yanni?
Thank you. So just the section of Stapleton's Road that's not going to be affected with the trees coming down, is that the section next to Petrie Park, or is it further down or further up? Or?
So there's pockets of trees. There's a pocket of trees near Warden Street which were supposed to be retained. There's another pocket probably midway down, maybe around Guild Street, that we're looking to retain. There's quite detailed plans in the consultation document that people were available to residents, and along with we did the drop-in sessions, we brought quite large plans so people could see quite clearly which trees were and which trees were going to be retained.
I'm concerned about the idea that the rest of Dudley Creek is just left as is. So Crystal Street and North Parade, what are the plans that you've got developed?
Just normal maintenance, ongoing maintenance. That from the modelling that we have done, that would be sufficient.
So in fact the flows will decrease in that reach as a result of putting in the bypass in order to get that water level objective up at Warden Street. So the amount of water that we need to go along that stretch is reduced with option C. Still a considerable flow, but certainly less than what we'd expect to see today.
That's why you've done St Albans, Dudley and Shirley on the left-hand side, and why you don't think you need to do anything there.
Yeah, so that St Albans Shirley work was approved as part of the upstream works, so we've not gone back out to consultation on those. There's still work in those areas, significant work proposed on Shirley Stream and St Albans Creek, so we've had that communication and consultation with the community late last year. But we didn't seek to reconsult on that as part of the downstream options.
Can I just check that Dudley Street and North Parade, the Dudley Creek around North Parade and Crystal Street, it won't be returned to pre-earthquake level?
Well, there will be reduced flows along there, but the water levels, I'd have to double check about the water level. I don't anticipate it dropping a significant amount. The flood risk through those areas wasn't identified as a significant risk to houses.
The other question I have is around the impact on the Avon River. So that area really floods quite a lot. Further on along, as you go through that loop and into the next loop. So how is this going to impact on that? I mean, if you take Avon Park, for example, those roads are constantly closed due to flooding. So all this water going in, how different is it to what, is there going to be any change or impact?
Did you want to address the other plans for the downstream mitigation works, or? Sure. So, as I alluded to earlier, we've done some work looking at the impacts on the Avon River itself, and we believe those to be very small. Downstream flood protection works, which would afford some protection to the areas like Avon Park and through the residential red zone, are subject to ongoing investigations.
Right. So I'm just trying to understand from a sequencing point of view, if we don't know what we're doing in that residential red zone, how do we know what the best model is to divert water and where the best location is?
Well, certainly in the lowest reaches, the flood levels of the Avon are driven entirely by the tide. So any work that we do in the upstream reaches will have no effect on those peak flood levels. So we know for much of the lower Avon, indicated roughly by the extent of the tidal stop banks you see today, those temporary stop banks, is heavily influenced by the tide. So
So if you have a king tide that comes up and you've got this diversion coming in and they meet, what happens in terms of the hydrology?
Well, as I said, we've done some hydraulic model runs looking at the Avon and how the Avon responds with this scheme, and we believe the impacts are very small. The other thing is that having well, we do allow for what's a 5-year or 20% event in that scenario. If we add up very large tide with very large rainfall event, you get a very, very improbable occurrence, and well beyond what we'd normally design for. But we are looking to understand those risks, and we have done some work in that space, and we believe that those risks are.
We did traverse all of this prior to even having option C on the table. Tim, Glenn, David.
Thank you. Looking at A, B and C, they all try and follow roads where possible, or go through parks, or follow streams, river routes to obviously mitigate or reduce the risk from property owners objecting. And I'm just wondering, with option B, where it comes into Richmond Park and goes through into the red zone, if it had followed the east side of Woodchester Avenue and piped through to Medway Street, from your scale on the top right-hand corner, you'd be saving us the costs of over 200 metres of underground piping, plus if you're on the east side of Woodchester Ave, it would reduce the risk from complaints or issues with property owners. I'm just wondering why go through Richmond Park right through to residential rather than follow the east side of Woodchester Street, which is on the red. You wouldn't be in the red zone, but it would be the least intrusion on property owners, and so over 200 metres. Yeah.
My understanding was that the project team did look at that option. There's been a lot of work done down Woodchester that would have to be ripped up and pulled up, and that obviously has an impact on cost. So yes, for a number of reasons, that was looked at by the project team, and they felt that the route down through the park, a more direct route down into Medway Street, was a better option of the two.
But if the east side of Woodchester is red zoned, and although there's been work done on there, we don't know what's going to happen there in the future. So, I mean, what is it per metre or 10 metres to pipe underground? I mean, because on your matrix, the two risks were cost, or a number of them were cost, and also possible threat from property owners objecting, which I thought this would have probably mitigated a couple of those, and therefore perhaps would have changed its standing. Because any of these streets that anything is happening have to be dug up. And when we're talking about impact, when we're talking 140 odd trees, it seems to me that digging up a road that's had some work, and let's face it, through the city, roads are being dug up 3 times anyway. So it's just an interesting observation. So
you're suggesting that this wouldn't be underground?
No, it would be, but yes, it's a lot shorter. So if you're paying per metre to pipe, you can say in excess of 200 metres.
It's not.
Well, they've got a scale.
It's not a straight line, and it diverts.
Well, it's
back.
not a straight line there either. So
yes, I know, but it keeps continuing in the same direction, where it diverts back the other way quite substantially. Yeah. But you can't tell from a map. I'm not going to redesign a map sitting.
I think it's the cost of going through open field or park green space area is less than going down a road corridor. Yeah. That may offset in some part the reduction in length of the pipe. I suspect that solution is bounded by those costs B1 and B2, so we know that it'll be in that same sort of ballpark there, and still B was significantly more expensive than A and C, so it's unlikely to overcome that difference at all.
Yeah, Glenn.
Thank you. Just you said before option C, the most disruptive, but that's not saying the same by any means as saying the most invasive, is it? So is option C seen as the least invasive in your view, or is it one of the other options?
By invasive, do you mean
you said option C is the most disruptive.
In construction.
In construction.
Yeah, but it's not the same as saying the most invasive.
It's the option C is certainly the impacts the largest sort of number of people because it goes across the most number of parcels or in front of the most number of properties. So that's the basis by which we sort of thought it would be the greatest impact. Say, for example, Banks Ave would impact fewer number of residents. We would impact them in a different way because we'd be looking to replace their private bridges, for example, and that would obviously look to offset those access issues during construction. But certainly option C has the greatest number of people who might be impacted by those short-term construction impacts.
And just in terms of the tidal influence, I mean, that far up the river, it's not that strong, is it?
Well, even Dudley Creek up to North Parade along Banks Ave is still influenced by the tide.
Yeah.
So there is certain tidal influence up this far.
Yeah, but with what you're saying over that worst case scenario, a high tide and grid outfall, that probability is
Very low.
very low. Yep, okay,
David?
thank you. Yep.
Just a technical question on at the Petrie Street, or the start of option C, are you proposing to maintain the normal flow of water down Dudley Creek through what is now option A, or are we diverting a bulk of the flow at all times through option C? I'm just concerned that we may disrupt the ecology downstream if we divert a significant amount of water down option C at all times. So I suppose my question is really, is option C being used as primarily as an extreme event exit of water, and we're maintaining the flow downstream as per it is now? Or are we actually splitting the flow?
Yes, the pipe, option C, down Petrie Street through Randall Street and Medway Street would be dry the vast majority of the time. It's not diverting any flow under normal conditions. Under initial events, it might be taking a flow a couple of times a year during a big storm event. So it is literally an overflow. It's not seeking to divert. So in terms of the impact on the ecology, it would really be not affecting that.
Thank you.
All right. So now, do we have a mover and a seconder? So Pauline, Ali? Is there any discussion? Phil?
Well, I think perhaps from our questions it's really clear that, well, certainly I strongly support option C, the staff recommendation. I think clearly a huge amount of science and work and engineering work has gone into this, and it's really impressive because I think we're making a decision now to actually fix the issues that really, I guess, struck us back March of last year. And we know that there's a long history for this area where it's been flooded too. So altogether too, I'm really impressed that in fact the multi-criteria analysis that the staff have used really ties in, and I think Keith said it really correlates with the public feedback. It's really well aligned, and I think that leads us to make it to option C and supporting that too. And I think the weightings have been really sensible. Basically getting that flood reduction that was as a number one, and that hydraulic sustainability and resilience for the whole system in the future, and making sure that the environment is cared for. So altogether too, you know, as I'm saying, the whole thing really reduces the flood risk for this area, which is low-lying, Flockton Basin. And I think that the feedback from the people too indicates that they want the long-term outcomes. They want it fixed as well as possible, and in between from the very good consultation that the residents will cope with the disruption factor caused by the works. So I'm going to strongly support the staff recommendation.
Actually, look, I fell asleep there for a minute because just around the estimated cost, there is a side of me that just wants to have a little bit more comfort around it, and I know that I'd raised a couple of issues during the course of the week around some different ways that we could just test these costs. And I wonder if we could just put after the estimated cost of 48 million, which I know includes the upstream work, so it's another amount of money for the works that we would be approving today. But I just kind of want to have a subject to sign off between myself and maybe the chair of the Infrastructure, Transport and Environment Committee, so that we've just got the opportunity to have maybe an independent group just look at the overall costings. Because I mean, what we want to do is save some money down the track if we possibly can as well. So would that be okay if we just have, subject to the sign-off from the Mayor and the Chairperson of the Infrastructure, Transport and Environment Committee? Yeah. We won't unreasonably withhold our consent, obviously, but I just want to have that degree of comfort that we've given it that degree of oversight.
So amending recommendation 2.
Yeah, 3.2.
Yeah. It's very similar to the arrangement we had during the days of the task force, in fact.
Okay, yeah, that'll be fine. Thank you. Thanks for that. And you two quite happy with that? Yeah, so Pauline, Ali, Yanni.
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, I'd really like to also commend the staff for an incredible job, particularly not just in all the technical reporting and your brains and bringing in all the right people here, but the engagement with the community was outstanding. And I don't know how many meetings that you had, including one-on-ones where necessary, and so that was amazing. And I noticed too that in one of the meetings I went to, it was Evan Smith who stood up and said to the group, and it was a really large group, and he said, please everyone, try not to think of just your own personal circumstances here, think of the greater benefit to the whole greater population, the residents and the environmental outcomes. And I think people really took that on board. And I noticed in the consultation there's people in Stapleton's Road who've actually supported this as well. And I think that gives testimony to thinking of the greater picture. Even though they will face disruptions, they're prepared to do that. So there's a huge amount of work gone into this, and it's a very well presented report. And it's taken a long time. And I think too that we listened to the Banks Ave people when they came in, and I was very reluctant to lose trees there because of the established ecosystem. They talked about the birds, the bellbirds, the kingfishers, the wood pigeons. Now, you can take the trees out, you can replace them, but how long would it take to replace that whole ecosystem? A long time. I think with the option C going into me, I support that because I like the idea that we're following the natural waterway for a lot further. And in fact, we're not disrupting the stream really because it'll continue on its own course most of the time, and we only use the option C when the diversion when we have an event. And we all know from the reports that Di Lucas gives us regularly that it's very difficult to actually divert waterways anyway. They find their own course again, and to respect that natural course I think is really important. So by the time, and as we know, that staff have been continuing on the upstream improvements, including widening some culverts and perhaps removing some bridges, and most of all, improving the maintenance program, which is, I think, some considerable improvement. And also, in our area, the residents have been really, participating there and letting us know when the odd shopping trolley enters the waterways and things like that. And plus the Tay Street pump, which is going to take the water out the other way. So I think this is going to give a great deal of comfort to people who are vulnerable and who are not sleeping at night every time it starts to rain. Now, we haven't slowed down the end date because of all this, because we've been doing the upstream work, so we're still aiming for 2017, which is getting closer and closer. So for me, and the fact that the Stapleton's Road waterway will be enhanced at the end of this, and it is pretty scrubby looking, as a couple of people have noted today, and that's a huge benefit. So for me, I'm really excited about this today. It's going to enable a lot of residents to move on, to think that this is going to actually achieve something for them. It's going to enable this to get started after all this time and all this hard work building up to it. And I just want to thank you all very much for the work so far. I'll be supporting option C.
Thank you. Ali.
I just want to start off by not only commending staff but also my colleague Pauline Cotter, who's worked incredibly hard on this, both as a ward councillor but also as the Land Drainage Recovery Program Working Party Chair. So good on you, Pauline. I'll be supporting option C today. It aligns with what most people want, which is importantly returning the Flockton area to pre-earthquake risk. And I'd just like to repeat what Pauline said. You know, you imagine going to sleep or not being able to sleep as soon as it starts raining, and that's not an exaggeration. That is what is happening in this area. It will benefit at least 585 properties. So my support today is with option C.
Right, Yanni?
Yeah, I'm kind of struggling with this because it just seems to me that we're spending a huge amount of money for something that happens every might happen two or three times a year, and then the rest it's just redundant, and it kind of, the costs just seem massive for, and I know you said 585 properties, but I do kind of wonder whether this is the right kind of approach. This is very much an engineering approach as opposed to working with the natural environment in a different way, recognising that actually maybe some of this land isn't suitable for residential. So I don't know when we start to have those more serious conversations like we're having with the coastal hazards around, you know, huge expenditure on an engineering solution versus other zoning or planning mechanisms. I just, wanted to raise the issue that, you know, we've been through a consultation process, and I understand the angst that people have. I am really concerned about not knowing what's happening in the red zone. I don't think it's good decision making to rush into decisions when we have no idea what's happening in the red zone. I do know the Avon River. In fact, when it flooded, it came all the way up to Barbados Street in the Avon Loop. So we're going to put all this water into the river, and then it's going to still be flooding all the way further up in Barbados Street. So I'm just trying to kind of understand how that's going to work, whether that flooding is going to get exacerbated, because it would seem kind of sensible if you're putting a lot of water going this way and the water's going this way, what happens? So I have some real concerns about this. I do want to see solutions, but it does seem odd, I think, that we are just building a hugely expensive engineering thing that will be used a few times a year, if at all, and we've got some other major decisions that we still need to make that could be impacted by this. So the other thing I just wanted to say is I'm really not happy about 3.2. I think it should actually come back to the full council. A $50 million contract not coming back to the full council for sign-off. And, you know, I put my hand up. I think I got the City Care one wrong. I wish I hadn't delegated that away. I wish I hadn't delegated away things like the cost share, but this is a lot of money, and I'd like to have confidence when the tenders come back for the work that we actually sign off as a full council, so everyone's aware of who's doing it, what the costs are, and what the budget expectations are. So I don't know if 3.2 can be amended, but I would certainly like to move an amendment that it does come back to the full council.
So that's an amendment moved that we replace the subject to approval. Well, I mean, we're not delegating the authority if we're giving it to the council. So, so we'll deal. I'll deal with that one separately, and you just vote against it. Yeah, it's all right. We don't need an amendment. We'll deal with 3.2 separately because you can't grant delegated authority if it's coming back to council. So you'd have to, you vote against it. That's the easiest way to deal with that. I mean, it was to be a delegated authority to staff. We've added in myself and the chair of the Infrastructure, Transport and Environment Committee, which I think is a better than the full delegation to staff. But if you think it should come back to council, then you're not approving a delegation. So that's a complete contradiction to the motion.
I've already spoken, but I think the point about the impact on the Avon is absolutely clear.
No. Well, I'm not inviting further conversation. I'm just... So we'll put that 3.2 separately. Tim, I think were you next? David.
Thank you. I'll be brief. This whole project started off with a proposal to put a bypass across Warden Street and realign sections of Dudley Creek down Banks Ave. Ali, Pauline, Glenn and myself met with residents on numerous occasions, and I really want to compliment staff for taking the initiative following those sort of meetings to look at other options. And I think this whole process has been thoroughly worked through, and I'm totally supportive of option C, and I would urge other councillors to vote likewise. Thank you.
Very good. All right. Well, I'll put, now, is it easiest that I put 3.2 on its own first, or are you just not supporting the whole thing?
I'll just have my vote.
3.2. Okay, just take Yanni's vote recorded against 3.2. And so shall I put them two separately? I'll put 3.2 first. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Yanni opposed. And then I'll put the balance of the recommendation. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you. And thank you to also the staff. You've done an amazing job. Thank you.
The whole team up there. Thank you.